Good afternoon to everyone, and welcome to this online policy dialogue on greening ICT. What can the EU do? This policy dialogue is organized by the European Policy Center and supported by Dell Technologies. My name is Stefan Sipka. I'm an EPC policy analyst, and I will be moderating this event. I believe we are all witnessing digital transformation that our economy and society are going through. We are more and more reliant on information and communication technologies, such as different devices and gadgets, apps, software, algorithms, all supported by ICT infrastructure. This is even more the case during this ongoing corona crisis. Digital transformation and ICT can serve as enablers to help modernize our economy, to make our lives easier, and also to support the green transition. And the EPC has been working on this topic extensively the last couple of years, and in our previous studies we have showcased what the digital transformation can do for the green transition and what the possible future policy developments could be in this regard. On the other side, there are the more we are dependent on ICT, that can also lead to higher emissions due to electricity consumption. So there could be higher emissions that can harm our climate and also lead to pollution. And also the more ICT we use, that can lead to increased e-waste, which is the fastest growing waste stream at the moment. Therefore, I would say the trick is to reap the benefits of the digital transformation while keeping these negative side effects in check. And this is what we will be discussing today. What are the environmental and climate impacts of ICT? What is the state of play, and what are the prospects with overcoming these challenges? And what the policymakers, namely, what can the EU do to help make our ICT greener? We have 4 panelists today to discuss this topic. I will shortly introduce them. So Gerard de Graaf, Director at Digital Transformation, DG Connect, European Commission. Kim van Sparrentak, Member of the European Parliament from the Greens EFA Group. Paige Motes, Head of Global Sustainability, Dell Technologies. And Max Schulze, Founder of Sustainable Digital Infrastructure Alliance. Thank you for joining this discussion. Happy to have you here. And first we will hear from the panelists, followed by the Q&A. However, I would encourage participants to write their questions earlier so that we can address as many questions as possible during the Q&A and before the event ends. So without any further ado, I would like to give the floor to Gerard, and happy to hear your take on the greening ICT topic and what can the EU do about it.
Very good. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you, Stefan, for these introductory words, and also glad to be here with such distinguished other panelists. You mentioned quite rightly in your opening remarks, Stefan, that there is a positive and a negative to ICT. ICT as a problem and ICT as a solution, and this seminar is on ICT as a problem and what can we do about it. But I would nevertheless stress that ICT has a lot of potential also to do positive things. And I think, just to be very bold, I mean, the climate ambitions that we have, which are high in the world, will not be met without massive deployment of ICT and smart energy systems and energy efficiency and smart mobility systems. And the possibility, the potential here for ICT to reduce CO2 emissions is significant. I mean, at least 15%. One of the problems we have is that we don't have clear metrics. We do clearer metrics on the problem side. We have less clear metrics on the enabling side of ICT. We also, we've set up a European Green Deal coalition with also with the support of the Parliament, and to develop these metrics and also develop like practical use cases, because it's not a matter of just throwing more ICT in whatever agriculture or mobility or energy. I mean, it needs to be done in a kind of a sophisticated way. So I wanted to say that, because now we are going to turn the negative aspects and what we can be doing about it. I think another thing maybe to mention is that, of course, the emphasis on circular economy is very important. And circular economy, again, requires ICT, because you need to be tracking and tracing where is a product coming from, where is it going. Where at the end of next month, the Commission will come forward with the Sustainable Product Initiative, which is a very revolutionary approach towards the circular economy. And one of, say, the enabling features of this, and an indispensable feature of moving to a circular economy, is a digital product passport, so that you can actually see how a product was manufactured, what was the material efficiency. You can have like information about how to repair the product. You can have information that also how to refurbish or recycle or dispose of the product. So, but let's kind of, I wanted to say that first, because there's tremendous opportunities there, and we can't just focus on the negative without the multiple, benefits of positive. Positive is far outweighs the negative, but we have to do something about the negative. So a few points about the negatives. What are we doing? I know some colleagues may talk about the data centers, which of course is a concern. They're huge consumers of electricity, of energy, and therefore also contribute to CO2 emissions. We have a number of activities. We have set as an ambition in the European Union that by 2030, all data centers in the European Union should be carbon neutral. We have guidelines from the JRC. Also, our colleagues in DG Ener, together with ourselves, are now looking into the energy efficiency legislative framework, whether more needs to be done on data centers. The positive thing about data centers is that the interests are aligned. If you operate a data center, you want it to be as energy efficient as possible, because if it's not, it puts you at a competitive disadvantage compared to those who have much more energy efficiency. So this is different from like the topic that I will spend a bit more time on, which is on the electronics, and particularly the circular electronics initiative, because there the interests are not necessarily aligned. We are in an economy of buy and dispose. The new iPhone, and then next year you need another new iPhone. I think we're all used to this pressure of kind of using our equipment for a limited number of years, whereas in the past we used, like, the average lifetime of a laptop only 10 years ago was more than 10 years. And now we're in this kind of buy and dispose. So what can we do about that at the EU level? Well, first, we need to ensure the material. There's a lot of embedded emissions in these devices. So we look often, of course, at what the emissions that are being used by the devices, but the emissions that are kind of produced when the devices are manufactured are much greater than the CO2 emissions during the life cycle of this of the device, of an iPhone, for example, or a laptop. And of course, we want to extend that life cycle. This is what it is. A lot of it is about, and also users. We ask consumers, like, would you like to hold on for longer to your iPhone and to your iPad? Because the average time is now 3 years about. And they said, yes, 6 years, 7 years. We want to hold on longer. So this is also something where kind of there's a clear, not only an environmental benefit, but also a consumer benefit. So what will we do? We will reinforce the eco-design requirements, which is the way kind of the products are designed and manufactured. So to limit to the absolute minimum the carbon footprint. Then we will make sure that you can extend the life cycle. So through legislation, we will impose an obligation to keep the software up to date for a long period, because that's one of the problems often, that you want to hold on to the device, but it cannot perform certain tasks, or it doesn't meet any more the expectations of the consumer. So keep that software up to date. Don't just kind of stop the software, force the consumer to buy a new product, whereas that product that the consumer has is still perfectly good. Create a much stronger right to repair. At the moment, you have a right to repair when the product is kind of within the guarantee period. Is kind of there's a problem with that product. It's not according to the standards against which the product has been sold. That needs to be extended for longer. Also a real right to repair rather than a right to replacement, which is often what happens. You get a new iPhone, and whereas you could just as well repair the iPhone that is no longer fully working. And then, of course, to make the circle round, also make sure that you can easily return, refurbish, or recycle your iPhone. So that also these very, very valuable materials. I mean, there's a lot of rare earth into these electronics. There's gold into these electronics that can be taken out and used again, because there's a huge electronic waste problem in the European Union. We are #1 in the world in producing waste, more than 16 kilos per capita every year. And much of it is then also exported to outside of the European Union with all the health problems and environmental problems that go with it. So this is like one very important area of action where legislation will be necessary. And the Commission will come forward, for example, in September with an eco-design, reinforced eco-design measure. In September also with an extended right to repair, software extensions, and also a take-back and recycling scheme. So that's kind of going. And of course, we're also looking for the strong support of the European Parliament and of stakeholders to make sure that can be implemented very, very, very rapidly. There's other issues that we are working on. For example, efficiency of telecommunications network. I mean, it's interesting, in France, there's been a law has been passed that gives you as a user insight in how efficient you are from an energy and environmental perspective, your network is. So you can exercise choice. If you feel that your network is not sufficiently energy efficient, not sufficiently kind of environmentally friendly, you can choose and go to a competitor. So those are interesting areas that we're looking into, and see also whether with some kind of labeling or maybe some regulatory initiatives we can improve the consumer choice. We're looking into other, like how can AI and how can blockchain and the link to that Bitcoin be made much more energy efficient. There's a huge debate around Bitcoin. I mean, we're very actively pushing towards different concepts. For example, proof of stake, which is far less energy inefficient as proof of work, which is still the way kind of Bitcoin works. So we have a lot of activities across the board. Some of them like regulatory, others of them working with stakeholders in order to ensure that the environmental footprint, which is estimated now for electronics, for ICT, between 2 and 3.9%, so already bigger than the airline sector, that doesn't increase unnecessarily. That if at all possible, we limit those CO2 emissions. Let me stop here.
Thank you so much, Gerard, for this overview of what the Commission is currently working on, and yeah, indeed, a number of different approaches and files that you are currently working on in the SPI, on greening data centers, also these new initiatives on, for example, enabling green consumer choice when it comes to telecommunications that they use, on greening blockchain, AI. So it's really interesting to see what is going on. And also, thank you for also pointing out, indeed, that digitalization can enable the green transition, and we will need it to achieve it, but also that there are win-win solutions when it comes to these efforts to green the ICT itself. So that's, I say, a note of optimism, although there are challenges. There are still significant challenges to address. Thank you. And Kim, I would be happy to hear from your side then, also building on what Gerard said. How do you see the greening of ICT, and what additional measures we need to take to overcome this challenge of, let's say, environmental impacts of ICT and to make our ICT greener?
Yeah, thank you very much. And also thank you so much for the invitation to speak with this great group of experts today. I work on digital affairs, but I also have been a climate activist in my previous life, and I still consider myself one to some extent. So very happy to discuss this topic that is very close to my heart today. And I think indeed what Gerard said before we will need digitization to achieve our sustainability goals. But we do have to realize that it is more interlinked than sometimes the different proposals that are coming out of the Commission see now. Because we still see that, the two priorities, a Europe fit for the digital age and the European Green Deal, aren't always combined. And I think that is the key question we have to answer. How can we make Europe digital and green? And often when speaking with colleagues, I see really they focus on all these separate legislative proposals, and they consistently argue that greening the digital transition doesn't fit in the puzzle of these proposals. For example, the AI law, it doesn't regulate the environment, and eco-design does not regulate AI. But in the meantime, training the AI in a digital home assistant costs 300 tons of CO2, not to mention the use of rare materials. And all our increasing data flows powered by data centers guzzle energy. And data centers are inherently energy consuming, but also produce waste and toxins that permanently impact landscapes. Not to mention the vast amount of water used for cooling and the consumption and pollution of local groundwater. So if we really want to achieve, climate neutrality in 2050, we can't ignore the impact of AI and ICT on the environment. And we need a very clear strategy and strong action. And we are in this climate crisis that demands us to change every aspect of our society as soon as possible to prevent the worst. And while we see that in all sectors, we're really focusing on trying to limit, mitigate, and reverse climate impacts, we're continuing speaking about digitization in terms of growth. We need more growth in digital sectors without looking at doing it right from an environmental perspective from the start. And there are plenty of reasons that are mentioned for that, such as we don't have enough data. But if we're first going to wait until we have enough data to prove how much pollution there is, we might be already too late. So I think what is very important is that we don't build an entire digital sector in Europe now, and then only in 10 years tell them to fundamentally change their infrastructures or designs, because that's not good for business, and it's also not good for our digital place in the world. So if we look at technology as a subject, in some ways, it really provides a promising tool in our fight to save the environment. AI and data are very important in our transitions to renewables. It can help predict climate disasters. It can ensure less pollution in mobility. Really, indeed, as Gerard really explained already very well, contribute to this fully circular economy and reduce, materials and energy and waste in production processes. But the thing is that far too often is seen as something self-evident, that computers and ICT will help save the planet. And I think the Commission is really starting to acknowledge now that this is not the same, that this is not a thing. Technology isn't climate neutral on itself, and we have to, channel it in the right direction and make sure that it doesn't impact the environment in a negative way. But I think what we should do is really have a new focus. How can we use AI and digitization in such a way that it benefits society, that it advances research in the right direction and accelerates our climate transition without hampering our environmental goals? And I think what we have to do is to make sure that, the promises of the digital transition will be green promises. And I think when we really look a bit further into, the exact policies that we're talking about, I think what we really have to have a look at is indeed the right to repair and the amount of devices we have. The Green CFA group commissioned a study, and we realized that more than 50% of the environmental impact of digital technologies occurs in the production process. So we need less devices that last longer, and devices that are sustainable and consume less energy and resources. And this means a lot of things. It means that we need eco-design standards for digital hardware and software, because of how much energy your hardware consumes is completely dependent on what you do with it. And software design is essential to how much energy your hardware will consume. But also we need a strong and effective ban on premature obsolescence that doesn't put unreasonable burdens on consumers. We need the repairability, as Gerard already explained, and a really clear repairability score and strong right to repair. And we need to make sure that device and hardware are interoperable and break proprietary business models to make sure that devices are multifunctional and interoperable to reduce their number. And lastly, I think what is very important is that we promote reuse, incentivize secondhand sales and refurbishing with consumer protection. And I think the last thing I would like to go into is a bit more on the knowledge that we have and the knowledge that we can have, because for quite a large extent, how much digital technologies actually cost in terms of CO2 impact and environmental impact is still kind of a black box. Like some people even dubbed, the biggest secret of the boardrooms of big tech companies. And one of the things that I think is very important, and also interestingly, many small and medium businesses come to us with the question, how do we make sure that we have mandatory LCAs of products that are standardized, comparable, and verifiable? This is something that the industry is asking for, so that we really make sure that we know how much energy is used in every device and for every product, and that we can really start thinking, okay, how do we change this and how do we limit the impact? And I will keep it at this, and I will look forward to discuss a bit more. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kim, for your reflections on the matter, and indeed that it's important. I would to summarize it, that to ensure that digitalization is wired to the green transition from the very beginning, rather than to patch it afterwards, and also to ensure a coherent approach in the EU's policy making to ensure, so that the EU's green and digital agendas are really fully aligned. And of course, happy to come back to some of these points you made in subsequent discussion, but thank you for now. And Paige, we heard from the EU's policymakers. How do they see this challenge, and what measures do they envisage to make ICT greener? But then I would be happy to hear from your side, from the business perspective, from the industry stake on greening ICT. What is the state of play, challenges and prospects, and any support that you would need to also help make ICT greener?
Well, I really appreciate the opportunity, and thank you for having me here today. It was wonderful to hear my co-panelists really set the stage. And given the PACT EU policy agenda, I'm especially pleased about this opportunity, to provide an industry perspective to the discussion. And we look forward to sharing our, what we hope will be practical experience with the European policymakers, in the interest of an evidence-based regulatory framework that works both for the environment and for business. So, I'm in a favorable position to be able to follow Gerard and Kim. We agree that the role of technology is really important in playing a key part in tackling climate change alongside other social and environmental challenges for our sector and beyond. At Dell, we've placed a really major contribution on this effort through an extensive portfolio of products and solutions that span from the edge of desktops and laptops right through to the equipment and security required in data centers. And we've spoken a little bit about both products themselves and the data center setup. Both areas of impact are incredibly important, and I'll talk to that. We also believe that technology does play a crucial role in the race to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Our sector accounts for about 2% of global emissions, but our solutions are a key enabler to the other 90%. So we believe we've got the experience and expertise in collaboration with others to help us all get there. But like anything, in order to have credibility to take things to the next level, you have to have a track record of performance, that you say the right things, but also do what you say you're going to do. And like many others, including the European Union, we've made a public commitment towards net zero by 2050. We're aligned to drive abatement across our entire value chain, all in, and believe that accredited science-based targets provide the most robust framework to ensure carbon reduction goal and interim targets have merit. And we see this as a continuation of not just work in the emissions reduction space, but also through circular economy. We We believe that we need to take care of our own operations. We need to engage deeply within our supply chain to help them transition. But the fact of the matter is the largest footprint that Dell has is found in Scope 3 Category 11. That's the use of products we sell. So we have an imperative to take significant action here, not only to help reduce our own footprint, but because it has direct impact on our customers. So an example of where Dell took early action that has really set us on our journey for years is that we were one of the very first companies in our industry to receive validation by the Science Based Targets Initiative, the SBTI, for our Scope 3 Category 11 use of sold product goal over 8 years ago. And since that period, it's rallied our teams to drive out over 77% of the energy intensity in our entire product portfolio over that 8-year period. To Kim and Gerard's point, that's incredibly important to drive out energy intensity because we know the demand for compute power is only going up. And we believe that's now positioned us well to ready for the release of our 2nd generation goal in that area only in a few months. But we also believe that in addition to abatement focus for products, you also have to have a simultaneous, what we call the other side of the coin approach with circular economy, looking at the materials you use, decarbonizing those materials, and to the earlier point Kim shared, how do you make those products last longer, encourage repair and reuse? And so just to dig into that, we do have a set of public-facing circular economy goals. To that end, we've committed that by 2030, for every product we sell, we will take back an equivalent product to either reuse or recycle. And the focus there is reuse, 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 and at true end of life recycle. Because what we'd like to do at true end of life is be able to harvest those materials and reuse them in a closed loop fashion to make new parts for new systems. And we've been doing that for quite some time, which I'll touch on. The other focus on that is the more you're able to extract those materials at the end, we can actually have impact on our 2nd circular economy element, which is by 2030, we want 50% of the products that 50% of the material used in the products that we make to be made from recycled or renewable materials, so decarbonized materials. And obviously closed loop is the most efficient way to get there. But we don't stop at products. We want 100% of our packaging to be made from renewable or recycled materials. So we believe that this combined climate and circular economy action will have the greatest impact on our planet. And we've got to continually grow and evolve solutions to enable our customers to better participate in this activity with us. As an example, in 1996, as far back as that, we actually established our first recycling programs for consumer and commercial. We even to this day have pretty robust global programs taking back any brand in any condition. And we've even collected, as of recently, over 2 billion pounds, that's about 900,000 metric tons or more, of used equipment since just 2007 alone. And since 2014, we've been leveraging closed loop plastic. We're taking back about 100 million pounds or over 45,000 metric tons of plastic. And that's been used to make new parts in over 125 of our products. So we're really trying to put our resources, our research, and our knowledge to work. And we've now expanded that closed loop work to address other materials like rare earth magnets, aluminum. That not only reduces the carbon footprint of those products, it actually obviously has deep impact on waste reduction. We also believe that, to the earlier point, e-waste is the largest growing waste stream on the planet. We have a direct impact there, given that we are a very large global electronics manufacturer, but we're also trying to address the human issue. A lot of us hold on to our electronics longer than we should. When those, are even sitting in a closet and don't function properly anymore because we have a desire to hold on to things. So we're researching that human barrier, those habits that all of us have, to find ways to incent give back at the true end of life. We also are using open loop programs, so using scrap carbon fiber from the aerospace industry, scrap waste from the paper pulp making industry to make bio-based material for our laptops and beyond. So all of these things in combination are important. But very recently in December, we just launched what we really believe is a revolutionary design concept vehicle for the extensive focus on not only decarbonization of laptops, but also repairability. And that is what we call Concept Luna. And people may have seen the announcement about that, but it really creates an opportunity as a proof of concept for us to think about the roadmap in the future for our products on how we can access the parts more easily. People can have easier access to that so that there's less ability to damage the product when they're attempting to repair. It's a safer repair situation. But it also incorporates much more advanced materials and energy efficiency. So that product, by comparison, is 50% reduced on carbon emissions. So we believe that this really barrier breaking design Concept Luna, can be our real big foray into taking those ideas to the next level. But we believe this can only be done in connection with others, especially our customers. The same technologies that they leverage to enable other kinds of transformations in a digital standpoint can also be used to transform global systems like energy, land use, waste, water, transportation, manufacturing, the operation of the built environment, and things like cloud, edge, high performance computing, data analytics, AI, machine learning, as mentioned before, can all be used in a really great way to transition to the low carbon economy, but it has to be done right. And the products and the setup of those products and the environments in which they're being used have to be accelerated in the right way so they are as emissions reduced as possible to make that a nice trade-off. And a great example we have with one of our customers is Hark. They're an energy analytics and industrial IoT company based in EMEA, or a great example of that is Hark. They operate in this concept where, buildings that generate 40% of energy related carbon emissions worldwide, Hark is using Dell's distributed edge gateways to help their customers monitor energy consumption and ultimately reduce carbon footprints of their buildings. And that's a pretty significant impact. One of their customers, which is a UK supermarket chain, is using the Hark platform to centrally monitor and optimize energy efficiency of 24,000 devices across 600 stores. And in just 12 months, they've dramatically reduced their energy usage and saved $1.4 million in energy costs. So these kinds of solutions are just examples of where we're trying to lock arms and do more. So to close out from a policy standpoint, we'd like to point out that ICT products are already pretty extensively covered by sustainability legislative framework designed to reduce the environmental footprint. We believe that any further legal requirement should, balance their additional value while at the same time maintaining enabling manufacturers' ability to conduct business and innovate. But European governments certainly have procurement power that can drive transformation towards a sustainable circular economy. It's why we've asked the European Commission and EU member states to consider putting in place public procurement targets for sustainable technologies, and anything we can collectively do to increase demand for green IT in a coordinated way and based on common standards, we think would really move the needle. We think there's a sense of urgency, and I'm encouraged to see what we can all hopefully do together, and look forward to the discussion. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Paige, for also providing this overview. Also, what Dell and what is working on and what is happening, let's say, at the industry level, and how policy visions also translate, how they are being translated in concrete practice by businesses. And indeed, lots of opportunities in terms of digital as an enabler, lots of challenges to be addressed. And also it's interesting also what you made your points about the policies that are needed to support your ongoing work, and also such as, for example, also public procurement, rules on public procurement and purchasing that can create a demand for greener ICT. And of course, happy to continue to come back on some of these topics. But yeah, Max, happy to hear your views on the greening ICT topic. And to my knowledge, you have been working now already quite extensively on the ICT infrastructure, as well as greening of ICT software topics. You'll be taking these angles, and of course, we covered devices quite a lot. If you have anything to add, of course, but that would be great. But yes, also on your current work on the infrastructure and software related criteria or what needs to be done in this sense to green the ICT.
No, indeed, you're right. Thank you, Stefan, and thank you for having us. I will pivot away a little bit from the devices, but you'll see. I think we started today a little bit with the word negativity, right? We are talking about the negative side of ICT. I just want to counterbalance that point first. I think this is the greatest opportunity for Europe to make its mark in the digital economy, because we have been waiting for a chance to find our place in the digital world, and sustainability could be that one. And exactly as Kim highlighted, marrying, so to say, the sustainability and the green aspect with the growth of the digital economy and showing the world that you can have a digital economy that has no negative impact on the environment, that could be one of the greatest contributions of Europe to the global digital economy. And I think we should really see that as an opportunity, all of us. And again, as I promised, I will pivot away to software, because I'm a software person. So I just, again, want to remind us, there's no data center built, there's no fiber pulled, there's no server manufactured by Dell if there's no software demanding it, right? Just want to be really clear about that. And it's the responsibility of the software to report and to acknowledge its environmental impact, because it creates an environmental impact by demanding a certain set of infrastructure. And in order to fulfill that responsibility, software needs to have total transparency from its supply chain to determine its own footprint. If you think about it like this, we are talking right now a little bit about the supply chain of a car. The software is the car, and the software developer is actually the manufacturer of that car. And the supply chain needs to report all the information that the factory and the car needs to determine its own efficiency and its own footprint. And that's transparency is key. What does software need to make transparent? It's also quite simple. It's power consumption, which is a key driver. I think everybody in digital technology acknowledges that. Power, how much is consumed by the software. And of course, the embedded emissions of the underlying infrastructure. Those two variables, every piece of software should be able to report, right? That we don't need to talk about the willingness and the availability of data. Both, the willingness is there, the availability of data at the moment is not. And on the embedded part, I'm also really happy that Kim's party is conducting a lifecycle assessment into this in their current study. Very nice to see that. And to make us all aware again, software is what makes digital products and services, right? So the digital economy consists of digital products and services that consumers can purchase, and that's always software. And that's software requires infrastructure. But to the consumer side, if I'm using a digital offering, at the moment, I cannot make any choice based on environmental impact or environmental sustainability, because we can take the Zoom call, always a great example, or a Teams meeting, or whatever technology you prefer. Comparing it based on environmental impact is not possible, because that information for the consumer or for a business is simply not available. And to be honest, in the technology sector so far, what we've seen, that this is not something that technology companies want to talk about. Kim called it the biggest secret in the boardroom of big tech. I don't know why it's such a big issue, because everybody who builds software can kind of imagine how much electricity goes into it. But instead, we see this alternative narrative, and I'm sorry, I've heard it here today before, which is to forget about the electricity and the environmental impact of digital technologies, because the effect it has is always larger than its consumption. That's great, and I personally am pro technology. I completely buy into that, but yet I still would like to see some evidence. And that transparency is necessary for software developers to determine how much impact they're actually having. And at the moment, the infrastructure is not providing that transparency. To be fair, if you take Dell, who's here, there's some PDFs available on the embedded emissions of servers, for example, which are being used already. But on the electricity consumption, it's very, very difficult if I'm running, for example, in the cloud or even in the data center to get access to the power consumption data. And without the transparency of software reporting to the consumer what the environmental impact is, there cannot be competition on the environmental impact. but that's exactly what we want to have. We want products to compete, digital products and services, on minimizing their environmental impact. They're currently only competing on the speed of their innovation and how fast they can grow, right? That is what we talk about. How many unicorns has Europe created? That's fantastic, but again, we should also compete on environmental impact as we do in so many other industries. Look at steel, green steel, we're competing. Cars, we're trying to compete on environmental impact. Now let's bring the same mindset to the digital world. Because if we don't account for the negative externality of environmental impact in software and in digital products and services, society pays for it essentially rather than the producer of the software. And here, because we're talking today about what can the EU do, in my opinion and in our opinion, it should be the regulator to step in and demand transparency, not necessarily impose new rules on what should be done, but rather just say, let's make all the data available first and foremost, so that software can determine and transparently report its footprint to the consumer, and execute on that transparency side first and foremost to get the data in place. And again, I can only stress, I see this as an opportunity. Europe has always been the leader and the global pioneer when it comes to environmental and eco-regulation. The eco-design guidelines are a great example of this. And I think it should be us who introduce an approach first on how to make the environmental impact of digital products and services transparent in Europe and then in the rest of the world as well. We have at the SDA, of course, Stefan mentioned it, already released such a framework on how to do that. So I recommend that you look at it if you're interested in that. And we need regulation though to further accelerate that. That's on the transparency side. Now, a bit more technical, want to just stress two things: software development. So when I'm building software, so when I'm building the car in my factory and I'm a software developer, the performance per watt, so the energy efficiency of the software, has always been the key ingredient in ICT. If I make computer chips, if I make a server, if I make software, we've always worked towards that goal. However, the abundance of infrastructure, so today we just have infinite resources as a software developer, creates this waste. And by not connecting the resource consumption of the infrastructure with my software, I completely lose the feeling of how much resources am I really consuming. And unfortunately, again, the cloud has brought great efficiency increases all over the place, but the cloud paradigm, which is to basically have one massive set of infrastructure that is invisible to the user, so the developer, has actually created even more waste in that sense, because I really have no control over how much resources I'm consuming. And again, brings me to my favorite point: by making it transparent, I have more control, and by making it transparent, I can actually do something about it. They're appointed to the German government. We're working with them, with the Federal Environmental Protection Agency, the UBA, which is very active on this topic, to build tools for software developers to actually measure their energy and resource consumption and therefore be able to make some improvements. And then once we have that transparency, very technically, and here I completely agree with Paige's point, circularity has to happen first, right? Basically, ICT components and equipment have to be completely circular. I think we can also make a very easy change in regulation to extend the accounting period and lifetime of IT equipment, basically just from 5 to 10 years, because based on general accounting principles, IT equipment is worthless after 5 years, but it still works and it's still fully functional and high performing. So why not just make its lifetime from an accounting and finance perspective longer, and change the corresponding rules around that? And I would really urge vendors such as Dell, and I know they're already working on that, to embrace as a service model. So to move the ownership of the equipment to the manufacturer, so that there is an incentive to actually repair it themselves and extend the lifetime a lot. The second one is integration, a point that we've been stressing at the SCA for a long time. Integrating data centers and digital infrastructure into the energy system through either incentives or regulation is a must, because the digital infrastructure needs to adjust its power consumption to the availability of renewables. Otherwise, data centers are base load assets, for anybody who knows a bit of energy, which will not be supportable in the future. We need to address this now. And again, opportunity for Europe to be the first to recognize and the first to fix. And the last one, sector coupling, currently being discussed in the EED directive. Waste heat recovery. Europe has been talking about it, and since more than half of Europe is in the north, heat recovery from data centers, again, at this point should be mandatory. We cannot waste energy, and especially heat. It will be one of the most expensive commodities we will have in the energy system. Therefore, using it from the data centers is a must. It simply would be unacceptable to not do it. So to conclude, and then I'm done. Transparency is the first step, really important. Environmental impact of software needs to be visible, of digital products and services needs to be available to the consumer. Then the underlying technology can be adjusted, and most likely will start adjusting to a certain extent by itself, because the technologies to make climate neutral digital infrastructure are available today. We're not waiting for technology, we're waiting for a nudge and a little push, and the European Union should deliver that push. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Max, for providing this overview of how do you see this the greening of software as well as the ICT infrastructure, and how interconnected these two processes are, and indeed that there is a need also to provide this initial spark, and something that policies can create this kind of a demand and help to uptake already existing technologies, so to improve them further. Thank you for that. And yes, so we had this, let's say, first round of introductory remarks, and now I'm happy to continue the discussion, but also as part of the Q&A. So I would tend to focus on the questions from our participants. We have currently 2 questions, and I would encourage the participants to write their questions in the Q&A section as soon as they can think of them. Meanwhile, I see one question, so from Salvatore Sanfilippo, on basically writing, most of the hardware software of ICT are built outside Europe. Are you considering this aspect? And I'm picking on this question, and I would like to, let's say, wrap it in this more general questions on the global aspects. So we talked now about what is going on in the EU and the EU policies and how they impact businesses and what more needs to be done. But I would say that we can't achieve this greening of ICT in EU alone. That would be my assertion. And that we need to look at it from globally, given that the supply chains are transnational and there are different policy frameworks and different in processes, services, production processes happening, and it's all interconnected. So I would like to use this as a sort of a one specific question for the second round. However, this round will be very much, say, digression friendly, meaning that I would be happy to hear from you also any remarks and comments you would have on what the other panelists said, on top of this question on how to green the ICT within the global perspective. So that's one question, but then any other comments, reflections you may have on what the other panelists said, I would be happy to hear before we then go back to some additional questions. And maybe we can start with you, Kim. Also, based on your research and the study that was published by the Greens, how do you see that the greening of ICT can happen given the global dimension in terms of supply chains, processes, and policies? How do you see what can be done, and especially what can be done by the EU to address this global challenge of greening ICT?
Yes, thank you very much. And I think it is definitely something we take into account. And that's why we are also asking for a life cycle assessment over the entire life cycle, because we have to make sure that we set the rules in Europe, and by doing so, in the end, green the whole infrastructure and also the whole life cycle of all these products. Because what we notice and also what we hear from companies and other stakeholders that we speak to is that it's very hard to convince, for example, businesses in China who indeed produce the products to become more sustainable because they don't necessarily see a need for it. But if we have this life cycle assessment and it's very clear where the points are that are the most polluting, we actually see that there's more incentive to change. And I think as Europe, we have such a big market, 500 million people. And we have a very high rate of digitization in Europe. So that we are a very important market for any company around the world. So we can really do something by creating this life cycle assessments. But then also, I think what is very important, and it was mentioned, I think, by all of us, is indeed this creation of a more circular economy. Because indeed, the raw materials often also don't come from Europe, they come from elsewhere in the world. And first of all, because it's, of course, a very polluting industry, the mining industry, it's good to recycle more and to make sure that we have, first of all, less products. But then if we are at the end of the lifetime of a product, that we actually reuse the materials rather than letting it go to waste. But also just for, and that's good for the environment, also good for our own autonomy, that we're sure that we have the materials to actually produce the products that we need. So I think we really can set standards in Europe. We prove that we can set standards in Europe. It is one of our biggest strengths, I would say, when it comes to the way our internal market functions, that we set the standards for the world. And especially here where, for the longest time, there hasn't been any attention for the sustainability of digital infrastructures and digital products, we can really now set a standard that will transfer over the whole world and where we can really make a difference.
Thank you, Kim, for pointing out this. Let's say this power, let's say the way market power that the EU has, and that it can use as a leverage and to create a demand that can then have a positive spillover effect for the entire world, given that we are importing a lot, and other countries then would need to adjust their designs, production, and provision of ICT services and products to also meet this demand from the EU, if this demand is actually made greener, I would say. So that's an interesting point. Gerard, how do you see this global challenge of greening ICT, so that the services and products are provided from third countries and the EU's is basically need to address this also in order to green its ICT? And also any other comments, reflections from other panelists? I believe that some of the comments also in the end go back to what the Commission is working on. So happy to hear any additional reflections from your side.
Yeah, thank you, Stefan. I think on the point of like, how can we make sure that we have impact globally? I mean, I think Kim made the very right point. If you want to sell into the European Union, you better comply with the rules and regulations and the standards of the European Union. And that's our power. I mean, I'm also involved, for example, in tech platforms policy, the Digital Services Act, the Digital Markets Act. It's the same thing. I mean, Facebook will have to comply because they're operating in Europe. I mean, the same for Google, the same for Amazon. So if you are Apple and you manufacture iPhones and iPads, and the rules in Europe are they have to be sustainable, software has to be updated, they have to be repairable, which is often a big problem. Well, you better manufacture iPads that meet those standards. Otherwise, you're out of business in Europe. I mean, I'm sure Apple doesn't want to lose that very important market to them. So that's I think it's a bit more difficult because I mean I agree with everything that was said about transparency, about life cycle assessment, but that's easier said than done. We have proposed a CBAM, the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, and that we need, in order to implement that, we need to know exactly, like if steel is produced in China, how dirty is that steel or how green is that steel? Well, I mean, are the Chinese going to give us all of that data? Not so sure, but you need the methodology. I mean, this isn't just a matter of, okay, if the software, you have the data, you can make the data available. I'm sorry to say, Max, this is more complicated than that. I mean, there's multiple types of products. The question is, are you looking at the carbon embedded emissions, i.e. with manufacturing? Are you looking at life cycle, how the product is going to be used in the market? Products change all the time, software changes all of the time. So this is not so, I mean, we're now engaging into this work. It's complicated. It's really complicated. I mean, it's absolutely indispensable. Otherwise, the cross-border adjustment mechanism cannot work. Otherwise, consumers cannot exercise choice, but it's not easy, not at all easy, because it needs to be verifiable. It needs to provide, say, a predictable regulatory framework, because if products then are kind of, say, I mean, we say they're dirty, they're actually green, you have a problem. So that's, I think, something we need to bear in mind. Is the solutions, I think we can see them, but they're not just yet in front of us. We need further work. I think what is good now, and I think Kim made a very important point, we have for too long seen, say, the digital priorities transformation, the Green Deal, as two separate tracks. And I mean, I was very much involved in the recovery and resilience facility, for example, where member states had to come up with plans. We said 37% for green, 20% minimum for digital. How many projects do you think were there for green and digital? Almost none. The member state did not see those connections. So there is, I think, an awareness raising that needs to be done. And I mean, if we can get to a digital revolution that is also a green revolution at the same time, that's the best of both worlds. And the third element is, of course, where I think we should also pay attention. It should enhance our competitiveness, and it should enhance our sovereignty. And if these three come together, we have a very competitive industry in this area. I mean, there's companies that are betting the house on green. I mean, big companies like Siemens, I mean, Schneider Electric, you call them, they're betting the house on that. They're betting the whole future of the company on this. I think if we can create a framework in the European Union where digital transformation is green, it supports, and of course we need to address, say, the problem with ICT. We are all aware of that, and we're working on it. We need to do more, but it's on our radar, and we make it at the same time as the core of our future competitiveness. We win. I mean, I saw a lot about kind of the CHIPS Act, for example. I mean, what we forgot to emphasize is we're investing massive resources, hundreds of millions of euros in low power processors, really the most energy efficient chips. It got lost in the conversation. But if we can be building these chips in Europe, low power, I mean, and we put the standards in place. You can imagine what this will do for green, what this will do for digital, and what it will do for our competitiveness. So that's where the three need to come together. And there are plenty of other examples. Maybe a last word on the circular economy. I think we need to look at the incentives. Right? If you look at the electronics, the incentive is to buy and dispose. I mean, if you ask Apple, like, well, what do you want to do? They want to sell the new iPhone as much as possible, and you kind of give up like the iPhone you only got 2 years ago. That's a model, just very frankly, we need to move away from. If we want to go to circular economy, that's not a sustainable model. But the circular economy concept also allows us to change the incentives. I mean, people don't want to buy light bulbs; they want light. Farmers don't want to buy pesticides or artificial fertilizers. They want a healthy harvest. I mean, they want kind of good kind of to produce good food. So if the model changes, so if the incentive for companies is not, I want to maximize selling of pesticides, I mean, it's not digital necessarily, but you need digital for this, or artificial fertilizer. But the focus is, no, I want to help this farmer to have the best possible harvest and limit diseases and everything else. Then you see a complete change of the incentives. It isn't about selling more. It's about it's actually about selling less. The less you sell, the more. So we go much more to a service type of economy. So that also those type of opportunities, new business models, we will need to incentivize. We need to kind of encourage in the European Union. I think we're seeing all of this now. I think we see these links. We see the potential of this. What we haven't yet managed is to put all the building blocks together to get it to implementation. But I'm quite positive, like in the next couple of years, that we'll be moving much closer to that vision, which I guess we all share.
Thank you, Gerard, and indeed happy to hear from you that about this kind of more specific points on some of the previous discussion and the question on the global dimension. And indeed, that there is capacity to do more, but yeah, that the devil is in the details, and it takes time to look at in each case and see how to in that sense how to make the ICT greener in a nutshell. And of course, the need to switch to new business models such as servitization, where arguably much more can be done at the policy level, also at the business level. Also, I just wanted to use the opportunity, Gerard, to ask you, because we had another question from Clara Grosjean. Basically, the question is a bit more specific. I mean, in case you have any updates on this, basically saying we have just finished in France the transposition of the directives on the sales of goods and digital content that address software availability. What are the next steps on this topic? Then lengthier availability, I guess, maybe that's the implication. Do you maybe have any let's say fresh updates that you can share when it comes to the sales of good and digital content directives, the transposition of them?
We're actually stretching the eco design measure, and we're not going to wait until the Sustainable Product Initiative is in place, which of course is trying to do that, to move away only from the material efficiency and the production process all the way to the life cycle. So what we will do in the eco design measure for electronics, which is under preparation, is to put requirements in for the business to keep software up to date for a minimum period. I mean, we're contemplating at least 5 years. And also to have information available about repairability, so that you have access to kind of manuals and all these kind of things. So, and that is of course also important for the after sales, for those who kind of, I mean, Kim talked about refurbishment of devices, etc. So that information, how can you repair, how can you refurbish a particular electronic device is really important. So we'll put that into the eco design measure, which will come out in September. So this is going to be mandatory in the European Union from the end before the end of this year. So I mean, my guess is at least 5 years.
Thank you. And Paige, going back to the global dimension question. I mean, this is always very interesting to check, let's say, with the industry, given that we always talk about this lengthy, complex, and transnational supply chains, and every manufacturer needs to take that into account. And supply chains differ from one company to another and from one sector to another. For example, previously in our previous work within the EPC, we noted these differences, for example, between the electronics sector and the automotive sector, how the nature of supply chains in different sectors, how it changes the whole game. And I'm happy to hear them from you. How do you see the challenges? What are the opportunities to green the ICT, given this kind of a global dimension that you're dealing with different first tier and the second tier suppliers, different legislations across the planet, in order to actually get the final product and to distribute it to a particular market? How do you see this angle in terms of greening the ICT? And of course, any additional comments, reflections on what was discussed so far,
Sure.
Happy to hear from you.
Sure, I'll just say quickly, when Gerard was mentioning a little bit earlier about the need to continue this education of these, you know, in some cases groups feel like they are disparate concepts. Better education of the individuals that are out thinking about the implications for the future is absolutely critical and important. So I support that and appreciate that comment. You know, we truly believe that with the ambitious agenda for a green transition of its economy, Europe absolutely has an opportunity to lead globally. We do believe there's a great deal of strong foundation in which that can be built. So our thinking is, you know, looking at those international forums like OECD, UN, et cetera, and understanding what their best practices are, integrating thinking across those elements to come to a global approach for greening ICT would be really impactful from the business perspective. As you can imagine, as a global company that Dell is, but headquartered in the United States, we would like to see a close alignment and coordination between the EU and the US, the world's largest economies by GDP. The EU and US Trade and Technology Council has dedicated a working group to provide a good forum for this. But we absolutely believe that looking at this in a joint way would be compelling and helpful. A patchwork is really quite difficult to work with. And we are hoping that there can be lots of effort to focus on how this can be done in a way that that a company like Dell can easily engage and be enabled by new capability, new regulation, but not be in complete opposition to potentially other regulations that they have to, that we have to operate within. And you're right, we have a global supply chain. That global supply chain feeds various aspects of the work that we do and the materials that we source, the manufacturing. Although we do own a number of manufacturing plants ourselves, one even in the European area, the fact remains that it is a global, we have to think about some of our activities on a global scale. So as public leaders are investing in a digital recovery, we are really focused on how can the demand be upticked for these types of circular and decarbonized products so that their sustainable IT solutions can really be the result of procurement power. We think the demand will drive a lot. So anything that upticks the demand certainly is helpful for us.
Thank you. Thank you for a comment on this. And indeed, this is important to consider, given that on the one hand, as I believe Kim mentioned, the EU can provide this kind of a create this demand and lead by example, for example, and other legislatures as well. But on the other side, it's good to also take a bit top down and look at the global standards and how can they be harmonized as well, so that in a way it helps address different differences in different legislations, and that they are not so big, at least, or that they're to some extent aligned. And I guess the EU could push on both fronts, working back home and creating this spillover effect, but also trying to contribute to this creation of global standards. And and of course creating a demand, a market demand from let's say from the public sector, but also from the consumers would be very much important to make this transition happen. Max, how do you see also the global dimension of greening ICT? So you mentioned the need to actually have a greater transparency, and also have this kind of a clear criteria, measurement criteria, how to assess the environmental impacts of ICT, notably in software, which then can help green the other sectors of the ICT. How does this mix with this kind of a reality that we live in, that there are different legislations, that there are different supply chains, that how do you take that into consideration in your work? And also, as mentioned, any other reflections or comments, also what Gerard said when it comes to, for example, this challenge of creating the let's say these measurement standards, LCAs, and anything that from your side that you could add on top of what you said, what can be done more specifically. If you hear me, because I'm under the impression that there is some kind of a disruption.
Yeah, thanks. I think I hope. Yeah.
Now I hear you, and I think now you're back. I don't know if you heard my question.
Do you hear me well? Oh, I hope so.
For now, yes. I think
I heard your question.
Yeah. Okay, great. I think we hear you well, but your camera, you're a bit you froze for a moment. Okay, now I think it's working well. So let's continue. Yeah, the floor is yours. Or not. I don't know. I think there is a connectivity issue again, which Max, if you hear us, we can't hear you, and I mean, hope we will have Max back online and back and join the discussion. But meanwhile, I do have Max. Are you? No, you know. Okay, so then moving on. I had actually a couple of questions also, some more particular, more specific files, and maybe Paige, I can come back to you on this. When it comes to specific EU policies, let's see, maybe it still works. I mean, just to complete the cycle. Max, I think it works. Okay, so let's try.
I heard everything. I heard everything you said. I switched now to a different network.
Okay, please
Luckily, I'm an IT guy, so I carry 3 SIM cards around with me. To the global problem, I think it's an interesting question, right? Because fundamentally, every problem in the digital economy, doesn't matter if it's the global supply chain of Dell or if it's the global business of Facebook, is always a global problem, right? And I think at the moment, most of the technology companies actually play to the fact that they can have different against each other on trying to regulate them to a certain extent. And I think coming together on a global stage in any forum that exists makes a lot of sense. And also exporting the European ideas, for example, Gerard, you mentioned the digital product passport, things like this, I think is a good idea to just, because we are, I think, still at the forefront of that, and exporting these things, these ideas and the frameworks that we create onto a global regulatory stage and also standardization stage, I think makes a lot of sense. And to my point of Europe taking the opportunity of being global. I also think that what Gerard said, the transition to service models will be very important. And I think that to be really practical, I think the public procurement, of course, can play a big role in that. If you look at printers, a very funny example, but still very applicable, I think most European offices pay by the page. They don't buy a printer, they pay per page printed, which transfers the asset to the manufacturer, which means the manufacturer has an incentive to come every 6 months and check if the printer still works, because otherwise they can't make any money. And these kind of transitions, I think, are really important. And I'm really on the same page with Gerard there. Where I'm not on the same page, or I have to just sorry about that, Gerard, is I agree that the complexity of making the footprint, so the emissions, the materials being used, is very difficult. I completely agree with you, and it would take some time until we can do this on a global scale across a global supply chain. Where I disagree with you is also Paige mentioned it. Scope 3, category 11, is power consumption of IT. It's a value that every piece of equipment measures, and we must connect it to the software that runs on it. We simply must know how much power is being consumed, especially because everybody in ICT says power consumption is the biggest contributor to the emissions. So therefore, at least power consumption, in my opinion, needs to be transparent. And I think that's doable with the systems that we have today, because most of the time we own them and we can measure the power consumption and make it transparent. I do agree with you again on the emissions. It's difficult. There's no globalized standardized LCA models. Completely agree. But on power consumption, I stand my ground, so to say. And the last thing I wanted to add to the availability question of software for hardware, I think I really would urge everybody. There's some really great work done by refurbishment companies, for example, TechBuyer in the UK, where they really benchmark servers that are 10, 15 years old using the same benchmarking tool that is being used at the manufacturing date. And they show that there's no degradation of performance, which you have to give credit, right? Great manufacturing right there. But it also means that we should really make sure that the software, not just plus 5 years, but plus 10, plus 15 years. I know so many people that use servers long after they've expired because they still work. And it is a great business actually to use old servers instead of buying new ones. And we should really encourage that business model, because the degradation of performance is non-existent, and we should use the servers as long as they work, right? And that should really be encouraged. That's my comment on that.
Thanks, Max. And then I would like to ask some more specific questions as mentioned beforehand, and maybe while hopefully you'll stay until the end, but while your connection is still working, just I wanted to ask you, I mean, there is also, I think, a lot of talk about shifting from data centers to this edge computing, where the processing of data will be made more decentralized and even be sometimes mixed with conflated with devices that we use, maybe bigger, like vehicles and so forth. But I'm just wondering, have you been looking into this, and what are the potential impacts, and what do we need to think about, how do we need to approach it now, where we are still dependent quite a lot on this more centralized data centers, before we then have this kind of a shift to edge computing in the following decade or so?
Yeah, it's a lovely question, Stefan. Thank you. It's the, I call it the greatest ping pong of IT that we know, which is this constant shift from centralized to decentralized, from centralized to decentralized. We've actually, if you look 20 years back, we had the terminal.
Okay, so we still have, I tried my luck, but at least we opened the question, so we can hopefully close it at the later stage. But yeah, Paige, then I would like to continue with the question I had for you, which is when it comes to EU policies, if you have any more specific comments on how can they help in, let's say, your work. And here we talked about the Sustainable Products Initiative on the eco design, for example. That's one. How do you see these ongoing developments building on already a very strong legacy of eco design for energy efficient electronics? It's like more than a decade, 15 years or so of this kind of designing electronics to be more energy efficient, driven by policymakers. So I'm wondering now, when it comes to these new requirements on energy efficiency and circularity, how do you see them, and how can they be improved from your point of view? And another point is, there is this producer responsibility to take care of used products, and different manufacturers consider, they address it in different ways. They can be collective responsibility schemes or individual responsibility schemes. I'm wondering, how do you see this at the EU level? There are lots of potential, but also remarks of how the producer responsibility scheme is implemented. I understand that also in the US, there are these product stewardship programs that depends on the state level as well. And just any comments, doesn't have necessarily to be on the EU level, but that you have on how these policies can help you. What are the potential challenges, of what can more be improved? Max, I will come back to the question, but let's now continue with this circle so we can then come back to you.
No problem. I'll try to be succinct so Max can come back in. I think there's a few different areas that we love to see some additional focus. And one of those items is that even just methodologies that are leveraged to measure emissions of products are not standardized. Kim very much talked about life cycle assessment. That is incredibly important. But when you look at even product carbon footprint across the ITC space, there's not one single standardized methodology for calculating that. And so that could be a very interesting space to look at harmonized requirements to measure that type of impact, to ensure more of a standardized view across ITC, to measure emissions in a comparable way. Additionally, when we think about circularity and you think about other types of requirements, especially in the public procurement space, being able to have more harmonized requirements there to focused on circularity, to take purchasing decisions much more into account. Today, many public purchasing decisions are still taken based on purchase price. And we need to find ways to incorporate greater sense of demand in the actual circular component, the elements of circularity within products, so that those are just as high level of a value in making a decision. The criteria has to be realistic, clearly, and ideally being able to understand what is possible versus where we need to go in the near future. But GPP standards that are defined by EU are not always fully implemented in the market. And so that is a space that we see some potential focus. As far as producer responsibility goes, it is quite true that there are a number of different schemas that exist across the world. And when you are like Dell in a position where you have global customer base, where at end of life product needs to be properly dispositioned, having more standardized approach to producer responsibility could be really, really helpful. Some of those are more troublesome or difficult to deal with, not necessarily in the EU, but certainly finding ways for the EU to take leadership in that space to make it much more palpable across the globe would be really helpful to see if that same leadership that the EU has put into play in other areas could be focused on in the producer responsibility space relative to take back a product. You know, as you can imagine, when we want to transition to a world where products can be used longer, or one person's end of life becomes someone else's beginning of life of that product, the movement of product around can be quite difficult depending on the regulatory schemas that you have to work with in order to maximize that effort. So taking a realistic look at where the barriers exist for that movement so that we can create multiple lives of products. You know, I might see that the use of my product may be X number of years, but someone else might want to take my previously used product and use it for a number of additional years, making that process incredibly easy and accessible is an important aspect to this, this reuse and repairability space as well.
Thank you, Paige. Thank you for pointing this out to what more can be done at the policy level from the industry perspective, and good to hear so that yeah, potential enhancements can be made further. And Max, maybe we could try our luck again on the question while you're still here.
It's somebody sabotaging my internet connection, for sure. To the edge question. So the great IT ping pong. I think, 20 years ago we had the terminal and the data center where the compute was, so to say, centralized. Then the computation was moved to the computer. Now we have very powerful desktop laptops and computers. So it became decentralized, and now we're moving to the cloud again, where everything becomes centralized. And the next iteration is, so to say, to the edge. And basically building little server rooms again. I think where we need to be really careful is that from what we know, these server rooms are currently slipping through most of, let's say, environmental regulation because they're below a certain threshold of most of the time much below 50 kilowatts of installed capacity. And we must really make sure that we're not now creating server rooms across Europe in every supermarket, in every factory that are not, environmentally aware or are built in a way that is not useful. A great example of this: 10 years ago, we urged all the server room owners, so if you had a server room in your office building, to move to co-location because that's more efficient, and get rid of these little rooms. And now we're starting to build them again. And I think we can learn from the last iteration, or even use the ones that are still there. There's over 40,000 server rooms across Europe, probably many more that are not accounted for, that we can just simply use to build, to refurbish, to renovate, and then enable an edge. From a software perspective, these examples of autonomous cars driving based on networks are, to be frank, are always make me smile, because we learn in software development school to never base life critical decisions on a network. So I think that will, the idea of using these edge networks and 5G to enable processes that involve the life of a human being is very unlikely. Let's put it like this, because as you see with my video connection, I think we're not there yet. And my phone is using 5G, that we can really have a reliable connection that I would want to base my life on. Maybe to put it a bit into perspective.
Thanks for making this comment also on the need to be careful and realistic in this sense when we transit to this new old settings. Kim, also I wanted to hear from you if you would like to elaborate on some of the points you made, for example, what more can be done to green the ICT, and you mentioned in the beginning need to green the artificial intelligence, for example, and how there is a potential more can be done at the EU policy level to link this digital agenda on AI with the green agenda. If anything more you can add, what you have been considering so far, what more can be done. Also, I mean, that would be, let's say, the emphasis on that, but on also on any other, let's say, these advanced digital tools that we are talking about quite a lot on the blockchain or Internet of Things, for example, all these solutions, if there are any suggestions, what more can be done at the policy level to make this ICT tools greener?
Yeah, thank you. Maybe just first I will go back a little bit on what Paige was saying, because I do completely agree that we need, better standards to measure and to be able to compare the environmental impact of products and technologies. I think that is one of the most crucial things that we have to make sure that they happen, because what I hear from the industry and specifically SMEs is that they are craving to have a level playing field. Basically, they want to make sure that that their efforts to actually try to be sustainable don't put them in a negative or that put them at a comparative disadvantage towards the companies that simply don't care. So this is something that I think is very important and that we have to strive towards. And I think when it comes to, what else can we do? And I think specifically when we're talking about AI, it is still something that's often being said, numbers don't use energy, etc. That's a bit the frame that we continue hearing. But we all have, I think, in this day and age, a responsibility to consider how much environmental impact anything we do has. And especially when we're talking about AI and software, we really have to make sure that, we don't program massive systems that then in the end guzzle up all the energy and are perhaps not even necessary. And I think that is also something that we have to, when we're talking about digitization, for some reason we have decided that it can be used for everything, and it has to be used for everything because it can be used for everything. But certain things are just fine as they are. And perhaps we should also be a little bit more critical on when do we actually need and want to use digitization in the world, especially when it has a higher environmental impact. I think when we're looking at the environmental impact, I really see that we are now at a very important crossroads. We really have to make the decision right now. Do we go for a digital future based on sustainable values and based on values, because we're often talking about human-centered digitization, human-centered AI, does human-centered also include that we preserve the environment of the human? I would say that's a good idea, perhaps not surprising as a green. But I think that is really where we're at right now, because we are indeed investing in more digitization. We're investing in innovation. We are investing in more technologies everywhere. If we don't make it sustainable now, when? That's the question that we have to ask ourselves. And that's why I'm very happy to see that there are a lot of initiatives coming from the Commission. I will definitely keep looking whether they are strong enough in my group's opinion. And I really hope to see actually also more of these discussions where we try to really see this crossroads where we're at and push the narrative further that the climate transition and the digital transition aren't mutually exclusive, but they have to go hand in hand.
Thank you, Kim, for these reflections. And yeah, we are a bit running out of time. So then I would give, let's say, Gerard an opportunity for final statement for today. And also, there is one question that we could maybe shortly address from Alessandro and Alfonso. If there are any good practices, any good examples in the recovery plans when it comes to synergies between green and digital. And I also just wanted to ask, we talked about the public procurement and the green public procurement as well. If you have any additional comments on this side, how can it support the greening of ICT? So to say this financial instrument side, if you have something to add for the end on this.
Okay, thank you, Stefan. I mean, I try to be really short because I don't want to be the one who is kind of responsible for running over. First, I mean, Kim is right. I mean, the digital transformation must be green. I mean, digital transformation will happen. No illusion, we're not going to stop it, but it must be green. It must kind of contain its own footprint, and it must enable to the maximum the kind of the greening of the rest of the economy. I mean, we need to do more. Clear. I mean, we're starting to do things. We need to do more, and then, of course, it's up to the Parliament and the Council to come to the conclusion whether we do what we do is enough. Maybe, I mean, one or two additional points. One, the very important role of the public sector here. This is not just about regulation. This is also about deployment, and this is also where the recovery resilience facility comes in. I mean, we're in areas here, energy, mobility, efficiency of buildings, building stock, also health, where the public sector is a critical player, also with its procurement power, where Europe has very strong industries with huge opportunities for competitive advantage. So we really need to maximize this. I mean, the public sector really needs to be, typically the public sector is 2 or 3 steps behind the private sector. It needs to lead here. I mean, one example, we're building a European public services blockchain infrastructure. The specifications are it must be the greenest in the world, absolutely greenest in the world. We do an innovation procurement, 40 million euros. We get a lot of offers from startups, SMEs in Europe who come with technologies that do not exist today. Much more energy efficient than the ones that even IBM with Ethereum is producing. That's the approach which we need to take. Procurement here critical. I mean, fully agree with what Paige said, importance of standards, importance of not just going on price. We need to kind of use that massive power of public procurement to drive change for the better and work with our global partners. I'm very actively involved. I'm co-chair of the TTC working group that Paige referred to. We're working together with the Americans on the life cycle assessment, on using green procurement to kind of drive this change, on kind of common standards, electric vehicle charging, integration into smart energy networks. So there's a huge opportunity ahead of it, a lot of work. I think we all have something to contribute. Let's come together and let's make it happen.
Thank you so much, Gerard, for this short closing remark. And just to summarize it, lots of things going on at the industry level, at the policy level, ongoing practices, also policy developments and new standards and new ideas being currently discussed. Of course, there are significant challenges to be addressed given that the ICT still accounts for huge emissions and environmental impact, but also digital can serve as an enabler. So there are these two sides of the coin to consider. And I would say, well, on a note of optimism, that maybe in this case, we can have the cake and eat it too. We can use digital as an enabler for the green transition to modernize our economy, but we can also reduce its environmental impacts of this digital transformation itself at the same time if we all invest efforts and work jointly in this effort. So I would like on this note to thank you very much for taking part in this policy dialogue organized by the European Policy Center, supported by Dell Technologies, to thank the panelists for their contributions, and also to thank for participants for their attentions and for their questions. We will continue this discussion for sure, and looking forward to having you at our future events. Thank you and have a nice day.